Ms. Evelyn Harper had always been a passionate teacher. Her heart swelled every time she entered the classroom, seeing the eager faces of her students, ready to soak in the lessons she had carefully prepared. She loved her job. She loved shaping young minds, guiding them, and watching them grow. Teaching wasn't just a job for her. It was her purpose, her life. Her life had been perfect. She was respected, admired, and had a promising future. But that all changed in an instant, in one horrifying act of violence that would haunt her forever. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind that made the world outside seem as if nothing could go wrong. Ms. Harper was standing in front of her classroom, explaining the intricacies of Shakespeare's Macbeth, when a shrill scream broke her concentration. Before she could turn around, there was a sharp, searing pain on her face, followed by the sound of laughter, sinister and mocking. The room seemed to spin as she stumbled backward, her hands instinctively rising to her face. She could feel something wet, something burning. Her vision blurred as she fell to the ground, the room erupting into chaos. The students screamed, some ran to the door, and others stood frozen in shock. But in the midst of it all, she saw him, the boy, the one who had thrown the acid on her. Jason Miller, a 14-year-old with a troubled past and a hateful glare, stood there, a look of cruel satisfaction on his face. The pain was excruciating as she was rushed to the hospital, but the physical torment was only the beginning. After the doctors worked to save her, trying to repair what was left of her skin, the verdict was clear. Her face would never be the same. Her beauty was gone, replaced by scars that would never heal. As the days went by, the emotional toll was worse. She tried to return to her school, hoping against hope that she would still be accepted. But the administration, in fear of bad publicity, fired her. The students she had once adored now looked at her with pity, some even with disgust. She couldn't escape the whispers behind her back. Her life had fallen apart. She was no longer the bright, beloved teacher. She was a monster. Her days were filled with loneliness and self-loathing. Every reflection in the mirror was a reminder of what she had lost, of the dreams that had slipped away. She tried to rebuild her life, but every attempt ended in failure. The world she once knew had turned its back on her, and she was left to wallow in her pain. But then, the rage began to stir. The boy who had destroyed her life walked free. Jason was never caught, never punished. The justice system had failed her, and she couldn't take it anymore. She began to plot, her heart growing cold with vengeance. There was only one thing left for her to do: make him pay. With each passing day, the anger grew. She spent hours in the dark, researching his family, his home, learning everything she could. She knew where he lived, his father's house, a small, rundown place on the edge of town. She could already picture the moment. She would confront him. She would make him see the horror he had caused. She would make him suffer the way she had suffered. Finally, the night came. Ms. Harper stood at the edge of Jason's street, clutching a large, gleaming knife. It was a symbol of her rage, her desire for justice. She felt no fear as she approached. His house, the shadows of the night enveloping her like a cloak. But as she reached the front porch, she heard a sound, a door creaking open. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze. Jason's father stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her immediately. "Get away from my house, you freak," he yelled, his voice laced with venom. Ms. Harper stood still, her hands trembling around the handle of the knife. She was so close. She could almost feel the satisfaction of finally getting her revenge. But just as she took a step forward, she heard the loud crack of a shotgun. Time seemed to stop. Her eyes widened in shock as she looked down to see blood oozing from her side, a hot, burning pain spreading through her body. She had no chance to react. The blast had been too quick, too sudden. The last thing she saw was Jason's father standing there, the shotgun still smoking in his hands. As he took a step forward, his face twisted in disgust. "You should never have come here," he said, his voice a low growl. The darkness closed in around her, and Miss Harper fell to the ground, the knife slipping from her hand. As her vision blurred, she realized there would be no vengeance, no justice. The rage that had consumed her had led her to this moment, to the end of everything. And in the silence that followed, she knew that she had lost not just her life, but her soul as well. The night was still, the kind of quiet that made the air feel heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ms. Evelyn Harper lay lifeless on the cold, hard ground, her blood mixing with the dirt as the darkness closed in around her. But what no one knew, what no one could have possibly anticipated, was that death was not the end for her. As she lay there, her body still, a flicker of light sparked within her, the faintest ember of something dark, something vengeful. In that moment, a terrible force began to stir, a power that had been awakened by her blood, her pain, and her rage. Her soul, twisted by anger and hatred, refused to move on. The ground trembled, and the winds howled as if mourning her death. But there was no peace. The air grew colder, and the silence thickened with something unnatural. Miss Harper's body, now drained of life, began to twitch. Her fingers curled, her skin stretched taut over her skeletal frame. And then, her eyes snapped open. But they were no longer the eyes of a teacher, no longer the eyes of a woman who had once cared for her students. They were eyes filled with pure malice, eyes that burned with hatred, eyes that were not human. Evelyn Harper had become something else. She was no longer just a teacher. She had been consumed by her need for vengeance. She was a demon, a ghost, bound by an unholy rage. Back at the Miller house, Jason's father, Victor Miller, paced back and forth in his living room, the events of the night weighing heavily on his conscience. He had done what he thought was necessary. He had protected his son from the monstrous woman who had once been a teacher. But now, as he sat there, he felt a creeping sense of unease, a coldness he couldn't shake. Suddenly the lights flickered. The house creaked as if something unseen was moving inside. The air became thick, oppressive, as if the very walls of the house were closing in. Victor's breath caught in his throat as he heard a low, guttural sound, a whisper that seemed to come from every direction at once. His eyes darted around the room and his heart began to race. He reached for the shotgun again, but as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, the temperature dropped even further. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice trembling. But no answer came. Instead, the lights went out completely. The house was plunged into darkness. Victor's heart pounded as he heard the whispering grow louder, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging slowly across the floor. "Who is it?" he shouted again, his voice cracking. Then a chill ran down his spine as the air grew colder than ever before. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged, tall and distorted, her body glowing faintly with an eerie light. She was no longer the teacher he had seen die. This woman was something much darker, something from beyond the grave. Her face, still horribly disfigured, twisted into an unnatural grin. Her eyes were black, voids of despair, burning with fury. Victor tried to raise the shotgun, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. What do you want from us?" he stammered. The figure moved closer, her form more transparent now, as though she were no longer entirely in this world. A wretched, guttural voice escaped her lips, colder than the night air itself. "Vengeance," she hissed. "Revenge for what you took from me." Victor tried to scream, but no sound came. The gun slipped from his fingers as the figure moved. With unnatural speed, her hands grasping at his throat. The last thing Victor felt before everything went black was the crushing weight of her rage. He was dead before he could even register what had happened. One by one, the family members fell. Jason's mother, Nancy, awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hall. The house was still cold, too cold for a summer night. She rose from bed, confusion and fear clouding her thoughts. Before she could call out, a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. Her scream was cut short as the figure moved toward her with terrifying speed, slashing across her throat with a bloodied hand. Nancy died in a silent gurgle, her eyes wide with horror as her life drained away. Jason, still oblivious to the terror that had gripped his family, was next. He heard the whispers, the dragging footsteps, and his heart began to pound in his chest. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the room temperature dropped. He pulled the covers tighter around himself, but it did nothing to stop the overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The door to his room creaked open. Jason sat up, terror flooding his veins. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaking. "Mom? Dad?" But no one answered. Instead, the same dark figure, the one that had haunted his nightmares for days, stepped into the room, its eyes glowing with vengeful fire. It was Miss Harper, her grotesque features illuminated by the moonlight streaming through. "The window! You!" she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "You are the one who destroyed me," Jason screamed, scrambling backward, but he was trapped. There was no escape. "Please, no!" he cried, his voice desperate. "I didn't mean it. I was just angry." Her laughter echoed through the room, twisted and distorted. "Anger is what destroyed me. Anger is what you will feel when you die." With one swift movement, she lunged, her hands outstretched, claws like the talons of a beast. Jason's last scream echoed through the house as she plunged her fingers into his chest, her soul-consuming fury swallowing him whole. Finally, Ms. Harper reached the one she had been waiting for, the boy who had ruined her life. The boy who had thrown acid on her face, the boy who had taken everything from her. Jason Miller had been her victim, but now, as a demon ghost, she was his executioner. She stood above his body, her monstrous form casting an eerie shadow over his lifeless corpse. And as she stared into the darkness of his empty eyes, her voice, once soft and nurturing, now echoed with the voice of vengeance itself. "You took everything from me," she whispered, "and now I take everything from you." The darkness of the night thickened as the last remnants of life slowly faded from the Miller household. The bloodshed that had unfolded over the past few hours seemed to have drained the very life from the town. But there was still a lingering presence in the air, a coldness that hadn't yet settled, an unfinished story that had yet to be told. In the depths of her ghostly form, Evelyn Harper stood over Jason's lifeless body, her eyes glinting with the satisfaction of revenge. But something in the way Jason's body lay, as if it had been broken before the final blow, made her hesitate. There was something about his last moments that lingered in the air, a strange shift, an odd energy. As she looked down at the boy, a voice, his voice, whispered through her mind. "It wasn't my idea." The words echoed, and for the first time since her death, Evelyn paused. She had gotten her revenge, yes, but was there something more to the boy's actions? Could there have been more to this terrible crime than she had thought? Her soul, already so torn by hatred, felt a flicker of doubt. The boy who had thrown the acid, the boy she had believed had destroyed her life, he had spoken those words in his last moments. Was it possible that Jason wasn't the true villain? Jason's words replayed over and over in her mind. "It wasn't my idea." The haunting chill that surrounded her deepened, and Evelyn's once furious, burning heart began to cool. She moved, closer to his body, her spectral form trembling with a strange mixture of confusion and rage. She wasn't done. Not yet. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. She turned from the body, floating through the walls of the Miller house, her vengeful spirit now seeking the truth behind the betrayal. She could still feel the rage boiling in her veins, but now she needed to know who had truly been behind the cruelty, the one who had manipulated Jason, the one who had forced him to commit the unforgivable act. Evelyn's ghostly form drifted down the hall, her presence like a cold wind sweeping through the house. She found the stairs and moved silently, effortlessly, her feet not touching the ground. She moved with purpose, searching for a specific room, a room that felt different, a room that exuded tension. She found it, Jason's brother's room, the one where the true mastermind of her torment likely resided. And there, in the darkness of the room, stood a figure, tall, arrogant, and cold. Ethan Miller, Jason's older brother, who had always been the one pulling the strings, the one who had tormented Jason all his life. Ethan stood by his window, looking out into the night, unaware of the ghostly presence creeping up behind him. He seemed lost in thought, his back turned to Evelyn, but she could feel the aura around him. It was one of dominance, control, a familiar feeling she had once experienced in her own life before everything was taken from her. She floated closer, feeling the rage inside her stir once more, but it was different now. There was no immediate satisfaction, no burning desire to strike down this boy who was not just a bystander but an instigator. No, there was something more, an understanding, a longing for answers. Evelyn didn't need to speak. She knew the truth now, and she would make him speak. It. Suddenly, without warning, Ethan's body stiffened. A cold, overwhelming pressure filled the room, and he turned sharply, his eyes wide with shock as he felt the presence of the ghostly teacher. What? Who? What is this? Ethan choked out, stumbling backward. But Evelyn was no longer the weak, helpless woman she once had been. She was a vengeful spirit, a demon born from her own suffering, and she was ready for him. Her cold, burning eyes locked on him, and her voice echoed in his mind. "Tell me the truth, Ethan." Ethan's face paled, his breathing ragged as he tried to understand what was happening. His body trembled under the force of her presence. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. "Please," he gasped, holding his hands up in front of him as though to shield himself from her. "I didn't want him to do it. I didn't know it would go that far." Evelyn's ghostly form hovered inches from his face, her eyes glowing with burning fury as she stared him down. "What did you do, Ethan?" she hissed. "Tell me, who is truly to blame for my pain? Who made Jason?" "Do it!" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He was trapped. There was no escape from this nightmare. "I didn't." His voice broke. "It wasn't my idea, I swear. I couldn't stand him. Jason was weak, a loser, always getting picked on, and I hated him for it. But then, that kid, Toby, he came to me." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Toby? Who was this boy?" "Toby," she repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "Who is Toby?" Ethan flinched at the sound of her voice. His lips quivered as he tried to explain. "Toby's the one who told me to make him do it. He said if Jason didn't throw the acid on you, he would go after my sisters. He said they'd be next, that he'd hurt them, kill them if I didn't force Jason to do it. I thought if I made Jason do it, Toby would leave them alone. I didn't want to risk it." Evelyn's heart, now a ghostly shell of its former self, twisted painfully. Her rage turned into something darker, something colder. She had been right all along. Jason wasn't the true villain. He had been forced into it, bullied and manipulated by someone else. Ethan, too, had been a victim, but in a far different way than she had been. They were both pawns in a cruel game. But Toby was the true monster, the one who had controlled them both, the one who had threatened everything they held dear. Evelyn's ethereal form shuddered with renewed fury. Toby had to be stopped. Suddenly, her form began to flicker. A shift in the air, a crackling static. She had learned what she needed to know. But there was one last thing she had to do: confront Toby. She would not rest until she made him pay for what he had done, for what he had forced Jason to do, and for the destruction he had brought upon her life. "You will live with this guilt, Ethan Miller," she hissed, her voice low and chilling. "But Toby will know the consequences of his actions. You will watch him burn, just like I did, and there will be no one left to save him." The last remnants of life had been taken from the Miller family, yet something remained in the Iowa air, something dark, something unresolved. Evelyn Harper, the vengeful spirit, had come for them all, but as she stood before Ethan Miller, she hesitated. Her eyes locked onto the trembling boy, who had already confessed everything, the cruel truth behind his brother Jason's actions. Jason had not been the one who had masterminded the horror. He had been manipulated, threatened by someone far more malicious than he. Toby, a boy who had been tormenting Ethan for years, had threatened to kill Ethan's sisters if Jason hadn't carried out the attack. Jason had been forced into the horrifying decision. Ethan, though complicit, was another victim in a twisted game of cruelty. Evelyn had felt the full force of her rage, and yet, something deeper now stirred within her. She couldn't kill Jason. He had been another pawn in Toby's vile plan. The real evil, the one who needed to be punished, was Toby. Her soul, burning with fury, flared brighter as the truth sank in. But she didn't act on her anger just yet. She stood before Ethan, the boy who had played a part, but who had been bullied just as much as Jason had. He was not without fault, but his guilt was not the same as Toby's. Evelyn's haunting gaze lingered on Ethan, but she could see the fear, the guilt, and the pain in his eyes. He had already paid a price for his complicity, and now it was someone else's turn to suffer. She moved away from him, and the coldness in the air grew even more intense. Without a word, she vanished from the room, her presence vanishing into the walls. The hunt was not yet over. The night had fallen again, a dark and oppressive blanket over the town. Toby, the true instigator of the nightmare, was oblivious to the wrath that was about to descend upon him. He was at his home, mocking the world with his arrogance, blissfully unaware of the hell that was about to be unleashed. Toby had always been the bully, the one who thrived on power over others, the one who twisted people to his will. He had always been untouchable, the one who made others bow to him, the one who controlled the weak. He had no idea that the teacher he had helped ruin had become something far worse than any of them could have imagined. As Toby lay sprawled on his couch, laughing at a video on his phone, he heard a sudden sound, a soft creak from the hallway. He paused, lifting his head. Something felt off. He stood up and walked toward the noise, his heart thumping, but his cocky confidence remained. Toby. The voice was soft but unmistakable. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, Ms. Harper's voice. He froze. His pulse raced. Toby. "I know what you did." Her voice seemed to come from all around him, her voice now a haunting whisper, chilling him to the bone. The room went colder. The lights flickered, and Toby's breath caught in his throat. He spun around, trying to spot her, but he saw nothing. His confidence faltered, and fear crept into his veins like ice. The walls seemed to close in on him. His mind raced. He had heard the rumors, the stories, about a ghost, a teacher who had been killed by a student. But he didn't believe in any of that. Not until now. The shadows in the corner of the room began to shift, stretching unnaturally, until the form of a woman emerged from the darkness. Her face was monstrous, disfigured beyond recognition, the scars of the acid burn glowing faintly. Under the dim light, her eyes were blackened voids, filled with an unholy, burning rage that seemed to pierce into his very soul. Toby's legs went weak beneath him as he stumbled backward. No, please. I didn't do it. I didn't. You didn't do it? Evelyn Harper hissed, her voice sharp and cruel. "You are the one who made them do it. You are the one who threatened their families, who made them suffer. You are the one who put my face through hell." Toby tried to shout, to beg for mercy, but the words caught in his throat as Evelyn stepped closer, her form growing larger, more monstrous. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. The door was locked, and the windows were sealed shut. Toby backed into the wall, his chest heaving as he realized there was no escape from the nightmare. The thing that had been once a teacher, a woman who had loved her students, was now a demonic force that would show him no mercy. "Please, please. I was just trying to get by. I didn't think it would go that far." His voice broke as he sank to his knees, his arrogance completely gone. His hands reached out, palms up in desperate surrender. Evelyn's ghostly form towered over him, her face twisted in a grin of pure hatred. "You thought you could control everyone, didn't you, Toby? You thought your power over others made you untouchable." Her cold, dead fingers brushed against his forehead, sending a jolt of ice through his veins. "But you were wrong." With a swift motion, she gripped his head with an inhuman strength, her fingers digging into his skull. Toby screamed, his voice hoarse and desperate, but it was drowned out by the sound of the house groaning, as if the very foundations were reacting to her fury. And then, with a brutal twist of her hands, she crushed his skull. The sound was sickening, a wet, cracking noise that reverberated through the room. Toby's body went limp in her grasp, and his lifeless form collapsed to the floor. Evelyn stepped back, her face still glowing with the malevolent light of revenge. The life drained from Toby's eyes, and as his body lay motionless on the floor, she whispered one final word: "Justice." With that, Evelyn Harper's form flickered once more, and just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished from the room, leaving nothing but death and silence in her wake. Evelyn's work was done. Her vengeance had been satisfied, not on Jason, the boy who had been manipulated, but on Toby, the true instigator of her torment. She had spared the boy who had thrown the acid on her face, allowing him to live with the weight of his own guilt. But Toby had been the true villain, the one who had caused her suffering, the one who had manipulated the weak and destroyed her life. As for Evelyn Harper, once a beloved teacher, she had fulfilled her purpose. Her soul, now at peace, had finally found the closure she sought. She would never return to this world. Her vengeance had been exacted. She was no longer bound by the chains of her earthly life, no longer the teacher she once was, and so the darkness swallowed her up, leaving behind a town that would never forget the terror and the truth of the teacher who had returned to claim her vengeance. She had vanished, never to be seen again. But her legacy, her rage, would linger in the shadows, a warning to all who dared to hurt those who loved and trusted them.